And I'm pleased to be joined now by one of our area's most distinguished authors, Maggie Wheeler. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. It's my pleasure to be here.
Well, it's our pleasure to have you, and certainly you've been no stranger to our channel over the years, but we haven't seen you in a while, so it's great to have you back. And let's talk a little bit about, first of all, I can't imagine too many people aren't familiar with you and your work, but maybe give us a brief synopsis of Maggie Wheeler and a little bit of your career.
Well, for the last 20 years, I've been writing a murder mystery series based on the construction of the St. Lawrence Seaway and Power Project in the 1950s. It changed so many things in Stormont, Dundas, and Glengarry. It was a massive international project that put a seaway through for the first time in the St. Lawrence River, and it built a power dam between Cornwall and Messina and put up that huge grid. And it changed a lot of lives because it also eradicated a whole section of our old front on the Canadian side, and we lost 6 villages and 3 hamlets. We call those the lost villages now. And I started writing the books. The first one came out in 2001. So that means that last year I officially marked 20 years as the Seaway Valley's Queen of Crime. Still can't believe that. And it was supposed to be one book, but it's such a massive history, and the personal stories are endless, and people seem to enjoy my characters. And of course, anybody who dies in one of my books is gone, period. There's no one coming back from the dead or anything like in soap operas. So they've been following the stories, which is great. And one thing I didn't expect when I first got started was having a public speaking career grow along with that, but that was part of it. And it's been a wonderful 20 years.
Oh, absolutely, and certainly we know, like as you mentioned, so many residents have really enjoyed, and I think that local connection too, the fact that we're familiar with the history a little bit, and it ties into to something that hits close to home. Talk to me about that. What was it about the Lost Villages? You mentioned, of course, it was such a big historical event for the area, but why did it appeal to you so much personally to invest that into your work?
Well, I don't come from the area. My roots are central Ontario, but I ended up in Long Sault in 1967. Long Sault and Ingleside were built during the Seaway. They didn't exist before then, because on the Canadian side, and especially in our area, they had to move about 7,500 people out of those villages because they were going to flood and make the head pond, which is now Lake St. Lawrence. And so I ended up in Long Sault, and I realized years later as an adult, through a chain of events that happened that we don't have time for today, but I became aware of the fact that after the Seaway was done, people didn't talk about it. If you can imagine going through such an amazing, in both terms, because it was also very hard emotionally for people. They were losing their homes, their farms, their landscape. We ended up with 7,500 people in this area that could never go home again. And if you really stop to think about that, we mean ever, period. You know, like Fort McMurray's rebuilding, and, you know, if you expropriate land, someone's farm for a highway, it still exists. All this land is underwater. And I grew up in Long Sault and never heard a word about it. And nobody was talking, because there was so much in 1958 that we didn't use the terms trauma, not for those things. As Fran LaFlamme said, Fran LaFlamme was one of the people that founded the Lost Villages Historical Society. And when we had our chat in 1999, she said, well, we'd just gotten through 2 world wars and a major economic depression. We didn't think you got through life by whining about it. And now we're in an era of, you know, Oprah and Dr. Phil, and everybody talks about everything. So it was quite a different time back then, but that was part of it. And it was also traumatic for many people. And I don't think they really understood how to cope, because the war was one thing, because the war, as much as war is a horrible thing, in its own way, it makes sense. But this was the government coming in and burning your home to the ground and moving you somewhere else and flooding your grandparents' farm with water so you could never go back. You know, like I could give you 100 examples of all the different losses that happen. And while that's going on, the whole world is watching and saying, what an amazing project. And that really is part of the difficulty of balancing a perspective with this history. Is the project was amazing. It really was amazing what they did, and 65 years later, it's still working. The only thing I know that's still working after 65 years flawlessly is Queen Elizabeth. that's it.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's so fantastic, and I know certainly, again, it's a subject that hits home, and you work it so well into your novels. So let's talk a little bit more about those your works. And you mentioned, of course, the public speaking career. Obviously, the last 2 years have been very different for everybody. But talk to us about your last couple years, whether COVID or not, and just some of the work that you've been doing.
Well, the last few years, book number 5 came out in 2017. And the 4th book, On a Darkening Plain, in 2009, was supposed to be the end of the series. So I was actually at an event this morning, and I said, so with book number 6 that came out in November that I'm going to be speaking about in Cornwall at the library, that's my 3rd attempt to end the series. And it doesn't stick. But it's, again, the history just keeps moving on. With the 5th book, I also worked in the history of the British home children, because I became aware in my own family that I had a British home child in my family history. So, and of course, hundreds of them came into the area of SD&G, and they weren't in the history books either. And I remember when I first started to look into that, I looked into my own library in my office, and it's all SD&G. It's mostly Seaway, but it's also about the counties themselves. There wasn't a word, so I thought we need to talk about that too. So it got worked into the series, and then I sat tight. 2017 was book number 5, and that was All My Worldly Goods. And then I was supposed to start writing book number 6, which I couldn't end the series with book number 5 because I left a cliffhanger. Jerry Strauss is taken away for murder. So I got a lot of howls from my readers and said, you can't leave him there. I thought, you've got a point. So there was going to be one more. And the idea was to write it in 2020 and start events and special celebrations to mark the 20 years in 2021, including the launch of the final book. And then COVID hit. And it's a funny irony for most writers, 2020, we wrote very little of any great value. We had unexpectedly all this time in our hands because we were home or whatever, like life changed for everyone, but you couldn't focus. So nothing got written in 2020. So everything got started in 2021. And we launched book number 6, All Will Fall Together, in November in a public event, which just kind of flew right between the end of COVID-19, not the end, but the wind down of COVID-19 that we were seeing, and we were thinking last Christmas was going to be a normal Christmas. Remember that? We're all excited. Yeah. And then Omicron came along and said, I don't think so. And right between the two of them, we did a public event and launched the book. But the only reason we did, and here's why, again, I can't end the series with this book, is that I realized as I was writing in 2021, the story kept growing, getting bigger, and which is actually a good thing. But I thought 2 things here. I am not going to have a book ready for people for Christmas if this keeps going. And number 2, if I did, it would be like this thick and it would be horrendous to ship. So All Will Fall Together is the first half of the finale. And we've got one more book coming out in October of this year to finish the series.
For now, no.
That's the plan. When I say that, people laugh. I don't understand.
Oh, it's so wonderful. Again, it just shows the number one how rich the story is, but also how much people love it and are invested in it. So obviously, you mentioned this is part 1 of this finale. Obviously, you don't want to give too much away, but what can people expect?
People can expect. We're going to pick up. Actually, it picks up the next day after All My Worldly Goods, because the last scene in All My Worldly Goods is Jordan Wiley, who worked with Jerry Strauss for many years in the Long Sioux Detachment, and he comes down from Odessa in north of Kingston to ask Jerry to come in for questioning because he's a suspect in a murder. And of course, he's like a little green around the gills, but he said, I will come in and ask him to do that. We don't want to humiliate this man. This has got to be a big mistake. So we pick up a few days after that, maybe a day after that, and everybody is in shock, like absolutely in shock. So the difference in this book compared to pretty much all of the others is that Farron is a major character. And with the first 5 books, she is the major narrator too. Sometimes you would get side scenes with Jerry and that sort of thing, but she's the one that walks through the story. But this time it's different because everybody's in shock. Jerry's not talking. He won't see Farron. He'll only see his lawyer. So that doesn't look good. And part of the shock is that they've said that the motive for the killing was that Jerry was having an affair with this man's wife. So everybody's like not in a good place. And they're all feeling awkward around Farron. So what you have this time is all of these characters going out on their own to try to find out what the truth is, no matter what it is, because they need to know the truth. And so you've got a lot of different trails that we follow. And I bring it to a point where we have set up all the trails. We have a ghost train in this book, by the way. When I brought the moccasin back from history as a ghost train. The problem is every time someone sees it, someone dies and they can't figure out what's going on. And so you've got all these lines out in the water, to use a fishing comparison. And then I leave it right at a point where we understand that Jerry is not going to be the one to help Farron, obviously, in this case, which has been in all the other novels. It's quite a switch. Everyone else is going to work, and they're all going to tiptoe around Farron, but slowly everyone will start to come together. My eldest daughter read the book after Christmas, and she said, "Mother," and when she says "mother," that's usually not good, and she said, "Mother, you resolved nothing in this book." And I said, "No, but I set everything up." And she said, "You're never going to bring all this in together." I said, "I already am." So the difference for me is usually I'm chasing Farron with a notebook, because when the book gets going, you follow your characters and you let them take you through it. This time I'm running in all directions. I'm trying to keep up with at least 5 different storylines that are starting to merge. So I sleep well at night.
I can imagine, but it just it really whets the appetite to start this and read the first part, and we can't wait for October as well. Although we'll talk about that a little more in the fall. I'm sure we'll have you back. But let's talk about the pseudo launch happening at the Cornwall Public Library, where you'll get the chance to introduce the Part 1 to residents in Cornwall. So talk to me about the event and how people can take part.
Well, it's wonderful because I started a book tour, first time in 2 years, in April. So I've been getting out to the different libraries, that sort of thing. This event in Cornwall is the first time that I'll be in Cornwall since the pandemic. And it's the first time that I'm going to come and talk about the new book. So I did a couple of Zoom events over those 2 years, and that was great. I mean, we're on Zoom. If we didn't have Zoom, we wouldn't have gotten through the pandemic. Everything would have just shut down. But there's nothing like coming in and talking to a live audience, because you get to engage with people, and then they can come and ask you questions after, have little chats, whatever. And I'm really looking forward to talking to Cornwall again, because it's long overdue in that way. So I'll be bringing in a talk about the last 2 years for me. A talk about the series, what it's been like to work with Farron Mackenzie for 20 years, sometimes quite exhausting, but she's an interesting person. And what the plans are we're continuing on with the celebrations to mark 20 years. It was supposed to be 2020 to 2021. It's 2021 through this year. And what they can expect in the fall, coming with the second half of the finale, the last book in the series.
Well, we certainly look forward to all of that, and we certainly encourage bookworms in watching to head over to the library for that event and get to glimpse the first installment of the end. So we want to thank you so much for your time, Maggie, and best of luck with the event, and best of luck with the final chapter of the book this fall.
Thank you very much.